This video is all about the Golgi apparatus, which is actually named after Camillo Golgi, who was the guy who discovered it, which is why this one has such a bizarre name, even by biology standards. But if we're looking at this picture of an animal cell, trying to find the Golgi apparatus on here, you've got it right there. It says it collects packages and distributes molecules manufactured in the cell. This one works very closely with the endoplasmic reticulum. What the Golgi apparatus ultimately does is it receives the finished products from the endoplasmic reticulum, whether they're proteins, carbohydrates, or lipids. And you can see that the Golgi apparatus, it kind of has this like funny shape to it where things are coming in on one side. You can see they're going through some changes as it moves down through, and then they are expelled out the other side in these little guys called vesicles. Vesicles are things that are sent from the Golgi apparatus to other parts of the cell. This one happens to be a lysosome, which we'll talk about in a later video. But the vesicles are the names of like these little packages that are floating around the cell with things inside of them from the Golgi apparatus. Again, the important thing to take out of this is things are coming in on one side, they kind of get modified and packaged as they move through, and they leave on the other side of the Golgi apparatus. If we take a second to look at our plant cell, you'll notice that there's a Golgi apparatus in here as well. So this is one of the things that show up in multiple types of cells. We've got them in plant cells and animal cells. Another thing I want to point out, some things will call this the Golgi complex. Our book calls it the Golgi apparatus, so I try to stick with whatever your textbook calls. Another thing you might see on a web resource we're using are the Golgi bodies. Anything with Golgi in it is referring to this organelle. I don't know why there's so many variations of the name, but complex, apparatus, or bodies, all of those things are referring to the same general organelle. So we're seeing the same thing here. Usually the Golgi apparatus is located just beyond the ER. Like one of the things you'll have to do this chapter is find things in an unlabeled diagram like this. Typically it's just past the endoplasmic reticulum, which can be kind of challenging, because if you remember, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is lacking those little dots, it's lacking the ribosomes on it, and because of that, some people get confused with the Golgi apparatus. So just be careful with that one. It is usually going to be a little bit further away from the nucleus than the ER, and also it kind of has this look to it of like different stacks or different layers, whereas I think this has more of like a maze-like look to it, which is one way to help you tell those two apart. But remember, it is located in both plant and animal cells. As we've been doing all along, we'll take a look at the transmission electron image of this one. I honestly think of all the different things we're going to look at, this looks the most like the representation that you end up seeing in your book. Just to give you some context on this one, you can see you've got products coming here from the endoplasmic reticulum. They're joining in on this end of the Golgi apparatus. They get sorted and packaged as they move through, and they leave in those little membrane-bound vesicles. These are like little taxis that end up taking things wherever they need to go inside of the cell. So overall, I think that's a pretty good representation of what you're actually seeing in that animated image as well. So the last thing for us to talk about are some features of the Golgi apparatus. The first thing that I want you to know about this one is that it receives things from the ER. It's very important to know how the different organelles interact with each other. So the Golgi apparatus is going to get things from the endoplasmic reticulum. Most important are the proteins. The first thing that it does with that stuff is that it packages it. Once it packages those different proteins, and by that I kind of mean like it sorts and modifies them a little bit, it does one of two things with the proteins and lipids that it's getting from the endoplasmic reticulum. One option is that it sends them somewhere for storage inside the cell. The other option is that they're actually sent out of the cell. We'll talk about this process at the end of the chapter. It has a special name. It's called exocytosis. And basically those little vesicles that have the products in them from the Golgi apparatus, they're going to determine what happens, whether things are sent for storage, one thing's going to happen to those, and then if they're sent out of the cell, then a different thing is going to happen to those vesicles that are containing the little products from the Golgi apparatus. But it's important to remember that this one's connected to the endoplasmic reticulum in the sense that it receives things from the ER. Like, it's not physically connected, but they're connected in that sense. It packages those products, either sends them inside the cell for storage, which I guess we should sort of add that here. This is inside the cell. Or it's sent outside the cell for use somewhere else. So I hope you learned a few things about the Golgi apparatus, and always, thank you for watching.